Hey everybody, Dr. Nick here on Feel Good Friday. Today we're talking about how controlling your pelvis is going to change your ab training, your leg training, and the health of your lower back. And it all has to do with a pelvic tilt. I'm talking about an anterior pelvic tilt and a posterior pelvic tilt and why they're so important. Let me demonstrate anterior pelvic tilt. An anterior pelvic tilt is when we tip our pelvis forward and we kind of stick our butt out like that. A posterior pelvic tilt is when we tip our pelvis backward and kind of round out our lower backs. Let's take a look at the muscles that are responsible for these two movements. An anterior pelvic tilt, where we tip our pelvis forward and our butt sticks out, the muscles that make that happen are our big hip flexors and our spinal erectors, right? Our paraspinals on our lower backs. So when your hip flexors contract in the front and our legs are stable, they're going to pull the pelvis forward. And when your paraspinals contract on your back, they're going to tip your pelvis forward like that too. The muscles that are responsible for a posterior pelvic tilt are the opposite muscles of the hip flexors and the paraspinals. The opposite muscles of the hip flexors are your hip extensors, which are your glutes. The opposite muscles of your your paraspinals are your lower abs. So in order to perform a posterior pelvic tilt, you need your glutes to fire and your lower abs to fire. So your glutes attach to your pelvis and down on your leg. When your leg is stable, your glutes are going to pull down your pelvis, right? They're going to bring the top portion of your pelvis down. When your lower abs contract, right, they attach up in your ribs here and then down on your pelvis here. When they contract and your rib cage is stable, they're going to pull that pelvis up from the bottom, right? So the glutes are pulling the pelvis from the top down and the abs are pulling the pelvis from the bottom up. It's important to remember that when dealing with opposing muscle groups like the hip flexors and the glutes, whenever one side is tight or in spasm, that puts the opposite side on stretch. If your hip flexors are very tight, that's going to pull your pelvis into an anterior pelvic tilt. And that's going to stretch your glutes. That's going to put your glutes on stretch. Same thing. If you're in that anteriorly tilted position, your paraspinals on your back are going to get super tight and it's going to stretch the lower abs out. When you stretch those abs and when you stretch those glutes in that posturing of that anterior pelvic tilt, it makes it nearly impossible to engage them. And that's a common problem, is that when people perform ab exercises, they tend to not feel it in their lower abs and they tend to feel it only in their hip flexors. Same thing with leg training. A common complaint is inability to feel leg exercises in the glutes. The quads get most of the work, but the glutes can't seem to get engaged. This all has to do with this pelvic positioning. Let's head to the gym and I'm going to show you how these subtle movements are going to change the way that you train. So first, I'm in an anterior pelvic tilt and now I'm going to press my spine down into the floor. Okay? So that pelvic tilt, I'm arched, now I'm going to press down. Once I press down, my lower abs are engaged. That's the movement that they do. My lower abs pull my pelvis into that posterior tilt. Now my lower abs are engaged. Now I'm ready to do a crunch or a reverse crunch. But the whole time, no matter what I do, I'm keeping that posterior tilt so my lower abs are engaged. Okay, now let's talk posterior pelvic tilt and leg training. Watch me demonstrate a squat with an anterior pelvic tilt. So my back is going to be arched, my butt is going to stick out in this anteriorly tilted position. I'm going to go down into a squat. When I come up, my back stays arched, right? My glutes are stretched the whole time, right? They're not contracting. The glutes, what glutes want to do is they want to contract and pull my pelvis forward and extend my legs, right? So the glutes want to take me from here to here. That's what they want to do. So when I go down into a squat and I come up, what I'm doing is I'm activating my glutes and getting a little bit of a posterior pelvic tilt at the top. You don't want to do a full out posterior tilt where you're rounding your back, but you want to get out of that anteriorly tilted position and bring your pelvis more toward neutral. That's going to help you feel your glutes a lot more during squats. Also deadlifts, same thing. If I go down into a deadlift with my back arched and then I come up and stop here, my glutes are never contracted, right? They're on stretch the whole time. So same thing, when I come up from a deadlift, I'm gonna put myself in a little bit of that posterior tilt at the top. So it's gonna look more like this. Neutral spine, right? And then just a little bit of a tilt at the top to help me squeeze my glutes and engage my glutes. Up. When your back is arched like that, when you're arched forward in that anteriorly tilted position, that's an awful position for your spine. That compresses your spinal cord and can cause a lot of pain in your back. So if you learn how to control that pelvis and keep it in neutral and fully engage your lower abs and your glutes, guarantee it's going to change the way you train. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.